My name is Tilde, and I'm here to tell the story of how I built and shipped expanded gender options at Pinterest. Some things I'm going to cover are: why do expanded gender options in product matter? How we designed the feature and measured its effectiveness, and what I learned. So, gender forms. Whenever I'm signing up for a new app or service and I come across those not-so-fun radio buttons that only have male or female, I feel a lot of feelings. Most of them are not good ones. And I have a lot of thoughts like, why? Why are you asking me for this information? There are a lot of reasons why genders get baked into product. There maybe are medical reasons, there might be legal or compliance reasons, but mostly it's demographics or marketing, like ad targeting. Yay, ads. Anyway, I'm not saying that these are good reasons, I'm just saying that this is kind of why it happens. When I first signed up for Pinterest, way before I started working there, I noticed those fun, radio buttons that reinforce the gender binary, and I sighed. Little did I know that I would soon be in a position to change that. But how did I get there? Software engineering is not my first career. I have a degree in gender studies, and then I spent about 5 years working in human resources, which was kind of fun in some ways, but then I got tired of performing emotional labor on behalf of a corporation. So I quit my job, learned to code, and got my very first engineering job at Pinterest. I was shit terrified. I had no idea what I was doing and was basically convinced that I would be fired at any moment. Somehow I managed to work through all that pain, confusion, fear, and terror, and learned a bunch of stuff. And now it's been 3 years, and I haven't been fired yet. So, yay. And anyway, after I first got hired, about a year passed, and then I started to feel more confident. Not just in my technical skills, but in my interpersonal understanding of the, politics that were going on around and above me, and how people actually work together to build and ship products. Being the kind of stirring it up sort of person that I am, I started some conversations about the gender thing. I wouldn't say those conversations were great, but neither were they awful. People were like, yeah, this isn't going to move our core metrics. We should just focus on things that are. Now, don't get me wrong. I was never under the impression that expanded gender options are going to move core metrics. That's not the point. It's the kind of feature you build because it's the right thing to do if you want your product to be inclusive of everybody. So I realized that it was up to me. If I wanted this feature to exist, I was going to have to make it happen. And I was pretty sure I could figure it out. Also, I realized that I could leverage lack of code ownership, which was actually a big problem across the whole organization. I didn't have to ask for permission because no one owned that code. I could just build it. Here's kind of a rundown of the back-end changes that I made. So before I even started working at Pinterest, we had this enum that represents a user's gender. The reason that unspecified gender predated me is because someone had run an A/B experiment and discovered that if you don't force people to put in their gender, you get more signups. Surprise, surprise. So what I did, I added an optional string to the user struct to represent a user's custom gender value. It is my firm belief that gender should be represented by a string, not a binary value. So that way, people can put in whatever they want, including emoji. What's the plural of emoji? Is it emojis? Emoji? Anyway, emoji are getting more and more important because as technology becomes more ubiquitous, so does text-based communication. And Emoji are a great way of adding subtext to text. Making emoji, and hell, all of Unicode, representative of the full spectrum of human diversity that exists is a little outside the scope of my talk today. But I will say that the emoji I'm showing on screen don't officially exist yet, although I hope they do soon. We are getting a non-binary emoji, though, in the 2017 spec, which is pretty rad. Anyway, let's talk about internationalization and localization and how they relate to gender. People use these terms interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same. Localization is the process of adapting your product, the text, the design, to work in one specific market. So this picture here is from the movie Inside Out. In it, the protagonist, Riley, she's a little girl and she just hates broccoli, except for in Japan, where she hates green peppers. As green peppers are a vegetable that are more hated by children in Japan than broccoli. Since Inside Out is a movie about feelings and empathy, it was important to get the little details right so the movie would work cross-culturally. So internationalization is the more general use case. Like, let's say you kept having this vegetable problem and you decided to build like a vegetable injector and ship it so that you could show users a different vegetable based on where they are in the world. That would be an example of internationalization. It's kind of like the tools and frameworks that enable you to localize in multiple languages. A base use case for localization, okay, you have an English string and it represents some user-facing copy. This string has a placeholder value in it that represents the user's username. At runtime, we look up the user's language setting and then replace the string with the string in their language, and then also replace the placeholder value. So if I'm a German user and my name is Tilde, hello username becomes hello Tilde. Why does this matter for expanded gender options? Well, I'm not a linguist, so bear with me, but there's this concept of grammatical gender that about a quarter of the world's languages have. Grammatically gendered languages the nouns have genders, and you have to match the other parts of speech in the sentence, like verbs and so forth, with the noun. English is not grammatically gendered, but it still has gender baked into it in all kinds of little places like third-person pronouns and titles. So when I first decided to build expanded gender options for Pinterest, I wanted to allow users to supply their preferred pronoun too. It's more inclusive to not only allow people to say what their gender is, but to specify how they would like to be referred to. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out because the localization provider that we were using didn't handle gender in placeholder strings. So we kind of had to work around that. On the plus side, the translation provider not using gender in placeholder strings meant that all of our user-facing copy was already gender neutral as it refers to users. The writing team hates it because you end up with some kind of awkwardly worded sentences where you're avoiding pronouns, but at the same time, I didn't have to do any extra work. Oh. This is awkward. Thank you. I didn't have to do any extra work to make our text work for users who don't identify as male or female. And who cares what the writing team thinks? That's pretty cool. So if you're not like Pinterest and you're not like locked into a contract with a certain localization provider, you have options. I found a bunch of software packages that support localization of gender and placeholder strings out of the box. Caveat, I have not used any of these personally, so if you have, I would love to know what your experience is like. Come find me after the talk or tweet at me or something. But man, can we talk about pronouns for a second? Pronouns are complicated. I wanted to shout out to JSConf for having the little preferred gender pronoun buttons. That makes my heart warm. I hope every conference starts doing that. But anyway, a lot of people who don't identify as male or female use they as their preferred gender pronoun. But there's so many pronouns out there. The website Pronoun Island is trying to list all the pronouns and their different conjugations and stuff, which I think is amazing. It does present kind of a quadrantry for localization, though, because like, how do these concepts translate cross-culturally and cross-languages? Some languages don't have gendered pronouns at all. Some languages, like Farsi, have pronouns for different, if an object is animate versus inanimate, for example. So since this is all really complicated, make sure that your copywriters and translators are working with linguists who understand best practices for gender-neutral writing in that language. All right, so talked about the back end, talked about localization stuff, then I did the front end and the middleware and API changes, blah, blah, blah. And then I made the front end changes. The first thing I did was put user gender on the settings page. Politically speaking, it's pretty easy to put user gender on the settings page. It's like the junk drawer of any application, and no one gives a shit. A funny thing happened after I did this, though. People, even though the conversation I'd started earlier had been a little lukewarm, people came out of the woodwork to support me, and they're like, oh, this is so cool, what can I do to help? I was like, well, it sure would be great if we supported this feature on iOS and Android as well. So I was able to kind of shoulder tap some people to make that happen. It didn't quite solve the original problem, though. Users still had to put in their gender when they signed up for Pinterest, and I wanted to fix that. Unlike the settings page, the sign-up form is, oh no. Unlike the settings page, the sign-up form is very political, and people really care about every pixel on that page, and it impacts top-line metrics. So I knew that we would need to take a more data-driven approach. Here are a few design iterations we went through on the way to shipping expanded gender options on sign-up. The first thing I tried was putting a simple radio button in. When a user checks the radio button, another text box pops up where they can put in their custom gender value. The problem with this is the sign-up code was reused in many places, which is a good thing, right? Don't repeat yourself. But one of those places was this narrow, little, skinny little modal. And when you internationalize text, or when text is localized into longer languages such as French or German, you need to account for about 30% more room for that text. So the text didn't fit in French and German in the skinny modal. I could have just made it wider, but I didn't want this feature coupled with a certain specific design. I wanted it to be more robust because I knew I wouldn't have a lot of time to maintain it. I asked a design friend for his feedback or suggestions. This is what he came up with. There are a couple of problems with this. Number one, there's no universal signal no universal symbol that represents all users who don't identify as male or female, except maybe the print symbol. Number two, a lot of people just straight up can't remember which symbol means male and which symbol means female. And number three, this was meant to get us around the localization or the the text length problem, but these symbols don't work all that well cross-culturally. Not so fun fact, but symbols of homosexuality are illegal in Russia, and a symbol for non-binary people could fall into that category. So really, this just wasn't gonna fly with anybody. All right, fine, I'll just do the hacky thing and make the narrow mode a little wider and move on with my life. But nope, I was blocked. The person who was responsible for the metrics of the sign-up form strongly felt like this was gonna cause problems. He was really worried that Pinterest's main demographic of conservative Midwestern moms would object. For a little while, the project stalled and I was frustrated. I didn't know what to do. And then, in the way of tech companies, there was a reorg. Suddenly, I was reporting to this person who had blocked me before. So my first one-on-one with him, I sat him down, I was like, look, if you want me to trust you and be on your team, then you need to get me some FaceTime with a designer who can help me get this form to meet your arbitrary standards. And you know what? He came through for me. It's a little bit of a tricky design problem, right? Like, how do you make a feature visible for the small minority of users who really care about it, but not so visible that the majority who might not understand or be upset won't notice it and get pissed off? This is what we came up with. There's a little info icon. When you hover over it, we show a tooltip. On the tooltip, we explain why we want this information, which is kind of important, and then allow you to put in your custom gender string. After a user clicks save, we replace male or female with the text that they typed in. So we rolled this out as an A/B experiment. Unfortunately, signups were down about 1%. Womp womp. Back to the drawing board. I hypothesized that maybe users were unintentionally triggering the hover interaction and getting confused. So I said, let's make this a click interaction. When we tried it with a click interaction, signups were flat. So we shipped it. Yay! Thank you, finally. I measured that people were actually using the custom gender part, because if signups were flat, but if no one's actually using it, then what's the point, right? But then we took things even a step further. I was approached by a designer on the mobile team, and she was like, hey, I'm redoing the whole mobile sign-up flow, and why is custom gender on web so hidden? Why can't we just put it in there with the other options? And I was like, you are not gonna get any argument from me about that. This was wrapped in an A/B experiment too, of course. It's not exactly an apples to apples comparison because the new sign-up flow is visually very different. But the metrics are better for it, so that's what we went with. Of course, quantitative metrics never tell the whole story, so we did qualitative user research as well. Sentiment towards custom gender options in this research was positive. People said things like, custom gender is an awesome idea for our progressive social climate. We got some love on social media as well. But the whole process got me thinking, like, why? Why is this feature so important to me? Why do I care so much? Yeah, so on this slide is a movie which some of you have clearly seen called But I'm a Cheerleader. In this movie, Megan, the main character, has a realization that not everybody struggles with same-sex attraction. She's different. She's a lesbian. Building this feature, I realized not everybody feels about having to put their gender into a box. But I do. I'm different. I'm non-binary. What does this mean for me? Still figuring that out, TBH. So just to recap, building this feature taught me that you can leverage the chaos that will inevitably be present in your organization to advance your social justice warrior agenda. After I got the ball rolling, people came out of the woodwork to help me. And finally, the process of writing software, building stuff, getting it right, getting it wrong, can teach you about yourself in ways that you might not expect. Thank you.